Well, hello everyone. It's Jeremy, the Existential Wine Guy, and let me welcome you to another Wine Wednesday. Over the last couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of really great questions, specifically about barrels and their uses, and what's the difference between French oak, and what's the difference between, French oak versus American oak, and the different types that are out there, and the different flavors that are involved. And I have to admit that I'm much more about the overall experience of wine. I'm not always break things down in such a way that we try to figure out the little bits of nuances and the technical breakdown of wine. I will say, however, that I'm always very interested in how certain winemakers achieve certain flavors within their wine. And a lot of that has to do with barrels. A flavor in wine comes from two places, and those are skins and barrels. So let's attack the second half of that, of barrels, with a little bit of a history of that. Barrels were originally actually invented by the Celts, but really didn't come into practical use until the Romans started trying to conquer everybody. So right about 50 BC, they started noticing that when they were trying to invade the Gauls, which is modern-day France, that they were using barrels for transporting beer. And what's interesting is before that time, the Romans were using what everybody else was using, just a bunch of clay jars and things like that. Those are very heavy. They don't really preserve the wine very well, but it was sort of what they had. So leave it to the Romans to go ahead and learn from other cultures. And they started using the barrels to transport the wine, I should say, but specifically for their military, for their soldiers. Fortunately for them, when they were invading France, they realized that France was nothing but forest. So they were able to start using the wood in France, and they started realizing as they were transporting the wine, that wine in these containers, these wood sealed containers, not only preserved the wine very well because they were airtight, but the barrels would import flavors and different characteristics with the into the wine, I should say. So that's where we started getting the modern day use. It started in about 50 BC, and then by the end of the first century, clay containers to transport wine basically went the way of the dinosaur, and they were really no longer used. Moving on, they were able to, and I've got this all written down because who's going to remember all of this stuff, right? One thing that started happening is, even though they were using these barrels, for their troops, mainly stationed in France, the barrels actually would make their way to Rome, and what they started to do is started to become a favorite of the Romans in Rome. So they were realizing that it was preserving the wine a little bit longer, it was importing it, and just the time it took to get from one place to the other would actually greatly improve the wine itself. So it was just one of those kind of funny things that, they were using the wine barrels specifically so they wouldn't have to carry all of that weight, and they ended up, sort of making modern day wine. So it was actually pretty funny about that. What's interesting also is the different characteristics, and this is one thing that I get asked a lot about. Oh, by the way, if you're just joining me, it's Jeremy, the Existential Wine Guy, and we're spending pretty much all of today talking about barrels, their current uses and flavors, and what you get from them. So the three main types of oak that get used for winemaking are French, American, and, if you could believe it or not, Hungarian oak. And I'm going to go over some of those characteristics that you get from each one of those. But hold tight, because you're going to find out that some of that actually doesn't even matter. When we talk about French oak, the flavors and the characteristics that will impart into wine generally are going to be subtle notes of spice. You're just going to have a sort of a more of a silky mouthfeel to it, silky satin. You might get some, roasted coffee and some of those darker flavors through there. With American oak, it kind of goes the other way. sometimes. You get like that sort of cream soda, like little bits of vanillin, that the smokiness sometimes that you get from a campfire, those type of things, and the mouthfeel will end up being a little bit more on the creamy side. And then we get to a Hungarian oak, which gets used a little bit less, but I did work for a winery, and one of the things that they taught me was that a lot of wineries, wine makers in northern Italy will start their wines off for a short while in Hungarian oak and then move them over to another barrel later on, usually French oak, and soften things up. And from the Hungarian, you're going to get a more astringent, qualities to it, black pepper, those type of spices. Now, all of that to say, because we need to get into this, when barrels are actually bought and made and bought, every barrel is toasted, or I should say charred on the inside. And when you order the barrels, that's one thing that you're going to sort of specify what type of toast or charring that you want on the inside. Is it going to be like a light toast? Is it like a medium toast? Or is it a heavy toast? Or somewhere in between all of those? And there's a good reason for this. Different wines have different, or I should say different varietals have different levels of acidity. And those levels of acidity will actually kind of reach into the barrel and get different things from the barrel depending on the level of toast that's in there. As it was explained to me by one of the winemakers, actually Joe Schabel up at Wrenwood Winery, is that Barbera is a slightly more acidic wine. So what's going to happen is if you have a big heavy charring toast on the inside of that barrel, that Barbera is just going to go through and just eat away as much of it as possible. So as you're leaving the wine in there for 10, 13, even sort of 19 months, instead of getting the softer notes and the vanillins that you might want to get from this type of like let's say French oak, for instance, instead, because the wine is so acidic, it's actually eating all of it. It's going to retain a lot more of the woodsy notes and those burnt notes. And if you leave the wine in there for such a long time, it'll kind of destroy the wine, or maybe not destroy, but you're not going to get the desired effect from the barrels. So instead, you've got to play around with it. Maybe for something like a Barbera, you want a softer toast, maybe a medium or medium light toast, and allow the wine to stay in the barrels longer to achieve the desired effect. And this will vary from varietal and also the winemaker deciding what they actually want. And it's really tough for this. Part of the subnotes of this particular one is, winemakers and alchemy. And I have this line that I use, and I believe it to be true. For me, winemakers are modern day alchemists, because there is so much science right now that you have to know as a winemaker to help control the process of winemaking. And then you just get to that point where you just have to know certain things. You have to have an understanding of how a barrel is going to react with a particular varietal. And it's a lot of times when mistakes are made, you can't fix them. So it's really important for winemakers to have a really strong understanding, not only of the varietal, not only of the vineyard that this might come from, but also the barrels. Also, as we know, winemaking is not an inexpensive endeavor, and barrels are no exception. The average barrel, let's say new French oak, is going to start anywhere from maybe these days about $1,500–$1,600, and will go up to about $3,000 a barrel. That depends on how many barrels you're ordering, when you're ordering them, if you can even get them. So there's a sort of it's a sort of a pass-fail test for a lot of winemakers to choose the right type of barrel and how much they can afford with those. As we're moving on, one of the things I also wanted to talk about is the choice of barrels, and actually the choice to use barrels also. We all are very familiar with the sort of like California or Napa style of Chardonnay, which is big and buttery and oaky, and you get that from the malolactic conversion, but as well as the barrel itself. These are going to be for big charred barrels that the Chardonnay is going to eat through, and it's going to give that sort of oaky quality to it. What's also interesting is sort of outside of Napa, a theme that you're seeing is that there are winemakers out there that don't want that Napa style. They want to do something completely different, and that's really cool of them to do that. So a lot of times you'll have these Chardonnays that actually do not go through the malolactic conversion, and it is a conversion from malic acid to lactic acid. So instead of getting a big, buttery, oaky type of Chardonnay, you're seeing these like wonderful winemakers in the Sierra foothills and other places that say, we're going to forego all of that. And what's the result? Instead of that big and oaky thing, you're going to instead get this very floral, striking, a little bit more notes of citrus to your Chardonnay. I gotta say that that's kind of how I prefer my Chardonnays. I like them a little bit more crisp and absolutely very cold. I really enjoy it when Chardonnays are done that way. So just kind of a cool thing. And I suggest that you try Chardonnays from all over. I think that, that's one of the things that it's very easy to get caught up on, is to say, oh, I like this. And I think one of the fantastic things about being able to explore and to wine taste is to sort of eschew that idea and say, hey, let me be open to new experiences, new flavors, and see what's actually out there. And there is just some phenomenal Chardonnays being done outside of the Napa and Sonoma region, not that those aren't good, that you should definitely be trying, and I'll probably put a list of a couple of those on the end of the live feed and into the comments. So what are we doing now? Oh, again, if you're just joining me, it's Jeremy, the Existential Wine Guy. I'm also open to any questions that you might have today as well. We'll try to go ahead and answer those if we have the time. I really want to thank Art for joining, Charlene as well. Sabrina, I don't see you as well. Thank you so much for watching today. You can also catch it on the replay, both on Facebook and on Instagram. So don't be shy about that. And again, if you have any questions along the way, I absolutely encourage you to post them up here, either in the comments now or later on if you're watching it. I really do enjoy sort of attacking these type of questions. I learn a lot from it. It's really kind of cool because I've done a lot of presentations regarding barrels. I've done tours and things like that, and I felt that I was pretty well versed in it. And as I was doing my research for this particular broadcast, I realized that there is always something more to learn about wine, about the process, in this case about barrels as well. And real quick before I move on, I want to thank Veronica for showing up here as well. She's on Instagram. Looks like Angelica as well. And Lewis, a long time no see. Great to have you on board and checking me out today. Again, I'm Jeremy, the Existential Wine Guy. You can always check me out on Facebook, on Instagram, and you can also check me out at existentialwineguy.com and see my horrible website and what I'm doing there as well. So what else am I looking at? We talked a little bit about the pricing of barrels, and we should go on that because barrels are really expensive. And just to give you an idea of how expensive they are, when I say that you're starting off somewhere, let's say at $1,600 a barrel, barrels get used twice before they are considered neutral. And by neutral, after 2 uses, and that wouldn't be years, that's uses, it's considered by most winemakers to be flat, that you're not going to impart any more flavors or anything else from the barrels, that it's not going to affect the wine. There's a couple of uses for wine barrels that are neutral. One of them is, I know some winemakers who will actually store Cabernet wine in there, and because a lot of times they want to use a Cabernet as a blending agent with other wines, and Cabernet, as you know, or as most of you know that are watching, it could go right to the forefront. It can take over all the other flavors. They can be very dominant, and sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you just want just the Cabernet, the color, and some of the tannins in there. So there are winemakers who, instead of aging their Cabernet in full new oak, they will go ahead and just put it in a neutral barrel and just store it for blending later on. So back to $1,600. The first time use of most of those barrels is going to be $1,600. The second time use for a barrel is going to drop somewhere into the $800, $600 range. So it's almost half the price because you know, you're not getting as much as the brand new barrels in terms of what's going to hit the wine. By the time it hits the neutral area that it has had 2 uses, it goes down to 40 bucks. So let's think about that again. $1,600, $800, $80. That's how important new barrels are. That's the pricing that goes into why a new barrel is that much versus the one-time use versus the neutral. Again, there's a lot of winemakers out there, especially sort of sometimes newer winemakers that maybe don't have exactly the funding that they want, that they'll go ahead and create wines from neutral. And you're also seeing a lot of guys that are using other types of wines, such as, other types of containers, such as the bring back the big eggs, and as we talked about earlier with Chardonnay, instead of storing the wine in an oak or even neutral oak, might go straight to stainless steel, and that does have you know, different characteristics. Obviously, you're not going to get the tannin, the softness of the oak, and one of the things that, you know, the new oak will do is it will soften up the tannins a little bit, so they won't be as striking. So if you're a person who likes the striking or the stain of those type of tannins, looking for winemakers that are putting red into stainless steel is always kind of a little interesting as well. So let's see, we're getting close up on our time because I try to keep these to around 20 minutes or so. But again, Jeremy, the Existential Wine Guy, and I want to thank you again for checking out my broadcast. And you're also, I'm going to start sending you to my YouTube channel, which is Existential Wine Guy at YouTube. You can search it up. I've only got a couple videos there, some of the rebroadcasts, but I do have some thoughts on Elvis and Marion Kiesker, and you should definitely check out that one. I'll be posting that up on Facebook relatively soon as well. Wanted to do a couple of shout outs also. One of the books that I've read that I really enjoyed is Tangled Vines by Frances, man, am I just going to butcher her last name? It's Dinkelspiel. It is a history of wine in California, and seriously, at some point they're going to need to make a movie. I mean, we're talking murder, blood, mayhem, corporate greed. Did you know that San Francisco, not Napa, up until Prohibition, was the main source of all California wine and wine that actually got shipped back east? A fantastic read. Definitely check it out. Also, I want to give a shout out to one of my new favorite websites. It is the Distilled Man. .com. Kyle, who runs that, it's really just you know, how to be a gentleman in the modern day age, or specifically his tagline, so I should read that, is actionable advice for the everyday gentleman. I've been checking out that website, and I've had a chance to talk to him a little bit via emails, and I just really dig what he's doing. So it's something you can check out as well. So we are almost at the end. If we have any questions coming up, Sabrina is asking me what my favorite wine of the moment. Oh my gosh. Anybody who knows me will say anything Spanish will probably not be refused at my table. Actually, no wine's going to get refused at my table. But I'll also have to say that I'm really been drinking a little bit more Pinot Noir lately. So as a varietal, that's exactly kind of what I've been drinking lately. And if we have any other questions, I will go to, oh, you know what? Let me just say this. Last week or the week before, a good friend of mine, Laura, sort of God, what a supporter. She was the first one to log in to watch my broadcast, and I absolutely failed to say hi to her. So I'm going to say hi now, Laura. Glad to have you watching the show. So please do me a favor, if you like what I'm doing here, and if you have any questions, that, you know, things that have been bugging you about wine or what have you, would love to have you make a comment, ask me. You can ask me on my website. You can ask me on Instagram Live. And that would be that'd be great. Also, Drew, Drinks by Drew, and if you're local to Sacramento, this is another guy you need to be following. He again asked me about what's my favorite type of wine, and again, Spanish wines are just kicking it. Also, I just made a post recently, and it's a map of California wineries that produce wines with a lower amount of alcohol. I'm starting to see the logic in that. So any of those type of wines, and when there's been some fantastic Zinfandels I've actually had. Peachy Mountain down in produced a Zinfandel that was like 13.5. I haven't had a Zinfandel under 14% alcohol since whatever. It was amazing. It was one of those really it was a fantastic bottle that my wife and I, we could sit down, we could share a bottle of wine with dinner, and then when we got up, we could actually stand up. Because a lot of times when you're drinking wines that are at, 14.5, 15, or in these days, about 1,600 or 16% alcohol, oh my gosh, it's, you shouldn't walk, let alone get behind the wheel of a car. So definitely check those out as well. Guys, we are at the end of the broadcast. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really glad to have you around. Again, any questions you have for me, please let me know in the comments or find me at existentialwineguy.com. I promise you, we had a lot to put in on this particular broadcast, but next week we're going to get a little bit more existential, and don't be surprised for some poetry or some nice at the moment, political jargon. Thank you so much. I will catch you next week. Cheers. If I learn how to, turn this stuff off.